as we get outdoors a lot, we might not always have a skincare routine on the trail. I know I haven't, and so many of my friends, we don't. We just completely neglect our face when we go out there. However, when we come back from our backpacking trip, whatever, our face is a wreck. So I just have some quick tips in terms of how you can have a basic but healthier skin routine on the trail. And so I have three. The first one is bring a biodegradable cleanser and a reusable washcloth. So even if it's basic Dr. Bronner's that you're using to like wash other things while you're on the trail, that'll work. You just want to make sure you're going to get the dirt and grime off your face and that sunscreen that you're using. And then the second one is bring your favorite facial oil or moisturizer, whatever you prefer, in a little small bottle, and use it at night. Because that's going to help kind of replenish your skin after being in the sun all day and exposed to all the beauty that you're seeing as well. And then the third tip is just avoid wet wipes unless absolutely necessary. So they're great, they're convenient. You can give yourself like a little mini shower on them. However, a lot of them are made from plastic. And you're essentially just giving yourself some extra microplastics to rub on your body. And they don't fully remove dirt either and grime. So unless you're using like 20 of them, could you not get a lot of them off? But you're essentially just moving around the sunscreen and the dirt and it's not fully getting off. So only use those if you're in an environment with absolutely no water and you really just want a little fresh pick me up, but try to find the ones, or not try to find the ones, find the ones that are biodegradable and aren't made out of plastics, and still then trek those out and don't bury them, because even though they're biodegradable means many different things across different industries, and they can take different time to degrade in the soil. And so different lengths and different conditions. So just pack them out and dispose of them properly.
I'm Meg Carney, an outdoor and environmental journalist, and this is the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast. Thank you for joining us so that together we can create a better outdoor space as we recreate. When it comes to skincare, we all want products that are safe, effective, and good for the planet. But the reality is, many skincare brands, even those marketed as natural and eco-friendly, are hiding some dirty secrets. From greenwashing tactics to hidden microplastics and PFAS, the industry is full of misleading claims that can make it hard for consumers to know what they're really putting on their skin. That's why, in episode 168 of the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast, I am sitting down with Mercedes Pepper from Nation Botanics to uncover the truth behind skincare marketing and explore how different ingredients shape effective skincare formulations. We'll talk about how to spot greenwashing, why microplastics and PFAS are a growing concern, and what it really means to choose sustainable plant-based ingredients. Mercedes helps people who get outdoors, particularly surfers, skiers, and snowboarders, get healthy skin without the fuss. She's an international development and social impact director turned skincare founder and formulator of Nation Botanics. The brand's flagship product, Surf and Slope, provides easy, high-performance skincare designed to combat the elements while supporting North American small businesses, farmers, and our environment. I'll be honest, and I haven't had much of a skincare routine up until the last 2 years. And during that time, first of all, I struggled finding anything I could use because I'm allergic to aloe. But also, I wanted to avoid products that not only harmed the planet, but were likely containing toxins like PFAS. When I learned about Nation Botanics, I was excited to try their products because of the brand mission and clean ingredients. That said, I've been using their Surf and Slope moisturizer for the last few weeks, and I've really appreciated it after a day of cross-country skiing with my dogs, when my face is dry and my cheeks might be a little windburned. If you listen to this episode and you want to check out Nation Botanics Surf and Slope yourself, you can go to nationbotanics.com and use the code MINIMALIST to get 15% off your next order. So thank you for joining me on the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast today. I have been wanting to talk about skincare for quite some time, so I'm really glad that we finally connected. But of course, to start, we are going to have to ask you, how did you become interested in outdoor recreation, and how does it fit into your life now?
Yeah, great question. Well, I've been listening to your podcast for a while, so I'm definitely into outdoor recreation. But I grew up on an apple ranch next to the redwoods, And so I pretty much grew up outside, always playing outdoors. My mom wouldn't let me be inside watching TV, which was great. And from a young age, I went camping, hiking, backpacking, snowboarding, surfing, river rafting, horseback riding, you name it. Everything was always outside. So kind of my definition of fun is doing something outdoors. And I even take my work today outdoors when I can, even if it's like I have to read something, let me go see if I can like sit outside in the sun and do it. Just completely immersing yourself in outdoors. And so and today I left my kind of previous career where I wasn't able to be outdoors as much. And I moved into a trailer, and through kind of that journey, I discovered wonderful Pinedale, Wyoming. And so I moved here because I can fully immerse myself in nature and be outside doing the things I love every day in the middle of nowhere. So it's pretty much part of my daily life every day.
That's amazing. I love Wyoming and being in the middle of nowhere. There's so many fun things to be doing in that scenery.
Yeah.
Um, so how has that time spent outdoors and that love for outdoors influenced your journey in creating skincare products? So in the introduction, we'll share a little bit about your background, but if you want to give a more detailed overview of your products, that would be great. And we can talk about how your products are designed specifically for harsh elements. So like when you're out skiing or surfing, etc. And yeah.
Yeah, of course. I didn't plan on going into my products too much in detail, but I
Oh,
will.
that's okay.
It definitely is relevant of like how they came to be, of kind of like my upbringing of being spending time outdoors. So kind of there's a few different ways spending time outdoors kind of has influenced my decision to make the skincare product and being outside in harsh elements. The first thing and the biggest thing was growing up in Northern California. I was kind of taught that food and plants are fuel and medicine. And was kind of eating organic before it was a thing and became trendy. And plus having experiences like taking a high school botany class, and making like huckleberry face masks as a little kid. But one of the moments where I truly kind of realized the power of plants and their elements was when I was in Fiji. I jumped off a huge waterfall and I didn't land correctly on my back. And so it just felt like my back shattered. However, luckily, the locals I was with helped get me back to health, by wrapping my back in these huge, ginormous, like lush leaves. And to this day, I haven't spent the time to figure out what exactly this was. I tried to research a little and couldn't, but these leaves helped like reduce the inflammation, the pain, and the swelling. And that's kind of where I had that light bulb moment, in addition to all these other instances throughout life of we have these power plants around us, and so many of them are being forgotten as culturally we've kind of been brainwashed that pharmaceuticals are the best thing for us. So that experience, and then also just growing up, spending a ton of time outside surfing and skiing, you name it, always being in the sun and having skin that has all sorts of issues and does react to different things and what I'm doing outside, what climate I'm in. So I wanted something that would work in both these extreme situations of skiing, dry, high alpine, to also something that would work in tropical surfing, lots of exfoliation water, and kind of everything you encountered in between. But it would help heal and restore it, but also be like a multivitamin for your skin to cover all of your bases. So I couldn't find anything like that. So I started researching plants and their cosmeceutical properties around the world and built this database of like over 250 plants. It was a fun endeavor, but really figuring out like which ones have the best properties to combat these harsh elements that we put our faces through every day doing what we want, but also then what combination and like perfect blend you could put them in where it can be adaptive and it can be customizable to what your skin needs that day, month, or season, or wherever you are in the world. And so I couldn't find a product that did this. And I wasn't really into using, like, I didn't really have a skincare routine in my early 30s. Up to my early 30s. It's only been more recently. And so I wasn't going to use multiple different products either. Like the industry tells you, use these 5 steps and layer and do this. Like that was just not what I was going to do. And I believe some of your listeners might not be hardcore skincare people either. But that doesn't mean we don't deserve healthy skin and you can't get it from just simple items that are already out there that are plant-based or you might have in your kitchen or you can find in a grocery store. So kind of that love for getting outdoors and being in the sun, and the sun also being one of the biggest factors that damages your skin for aging. And so the best thing is to just avoid going in the sun. But you, me, all your listeners, we like to get outside. We want to be in the sun. We want to explore. We're not going to do that. And so it's kind of like the catch-22. And you got to wear sunscreen, or you have to stay inside, or you completely cover up. But so kind of through this process and this journey, I also started looking into, and I was like, well, why aren't there more products on the market that are formulated to counter effects the damage that sun does to your face? It's all based on sunscreen, and that's great as your first line of defense or just staying out of the sun. But when it really comes to replenishing your skin after that, all it is essentially like aloe vera or after sun soothers or generic products that don't really replenish your skin after the effects of UV rays. So after countless hours doing this research on these different plants and like creating the perfect formula that had this blend, my product today has 94% of the formula, the Surf and Soap formula, has proven benefits from these plant ingredients that help revitalize your face after being in the sun. And so it's like the ultimate aloe vera or the serious after sun revitalizer. Plus, they're from plants where we like to get outside. Because if we're getting outside skiing or hiking or backpacking, there are so many wonderful native plants here that grow on these slopes, like fireweed grows in Wyoming here on the slopes that we ski on, or California's poppies across California's coastlines. And these plants endure these extreme temps and these elements, everything that we as our faces kind of do when we're outside playing. And so that's where that element kind of came in about.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I am just kind of getting into like more serious skincare type things as I enter my mid 30s more so. I think like 30s is a big time period for women where they're like, "Ugh, I need to start taking care of my skin."
Oh,
Um,
completely. I had the same thing. Like I'm in my late 30s now. And yeah, the early 30s was like, oh, wait, I'm getting wrinkles. I didn't use sunscreen ever. Like I don't really have a skincare routine. So yeah, I can relate.
Luckily, I have always been a really hardcore sunscreen user, so I think that has helped me a little bit. But I do want to talk about the skincare industry in general. So your approach of using plant-derived products and then also native plants is not necessarily the norm. And we're constantly being sold to, like social media, walking around, even there's billboards everywhere when you go to any store. The end caps are like, buy this new thing, or here's, like you said, the new steps in the skincare routine. So can you share some examples of what to watch out for in skincare products? And so this could be like greenwashing, ingredients that maybe could be harmful, etc. Maybe a big question, but
Yeah, that's a big question. There are so many things. And part of the reason why I entered this space was I got so fired up because I was like, wait, why are we just being lied to? Why are these things marketing themselves as good for the environment or sustainable? And then you look behind the curtain and they're not. Or why are we putting these microplastics on our faces and like we have no idea what they truly are? So there's all of these, and there just isn't so much research in it. And it really boils down to there's such a lack of transparency within the skincare industry. And recently they've been making movements towards more ingredient transparency of like what's in there. But still, even with the ingredient transparency of what's behind the fragrance, let's say, that's a common one that's people pick on. What are those multiple ingredients that are in there? But it's so hard to tell, even now that we have more transparency on the ingredients. You're sitting there having to Google all of them to be like, wait, what is this? Is this a polymer which has links to being a microplastic, or is this one of the silicones that is, or like so, or that is, because there are a few polymers that actually are not a microplastic. So that is a common misconception for some, but you really have to dig deep in order to find that out. But yeah, there are so many issues across the skincare industry. I think sustainability is the one that really kind of gets me in terms of these blatant lies, essentially, of like we're good for the environment or we're sustainable, but then there's no further information or data to back that up. And so I guess kind of like if we're going to be tips for listeners here, it's don't take everything at like face value. If it sounds too good to be true, or there's these claims or these buzzwords without any data or further explanation on how or why, be very skeptical. And thankfully, the EU did pass legislation fairly recently to help crack down on some of this greenwashing going on in the beauty industry. So hopefully the US will now follow suit a little bit more. But another thing is these green certifications or sustainability elements. A lot of smaller brands can't afford to join them because we have all these other, there's so many different certifications popping up. I mean, we have like, there's the classic, I'm completely blanking on, for business one, it's going to come to me. But there are so many different certifications that are coming out there, and not all small brands can join. So just if you find a small brand and they are having these sustainability claims and you kind of look below the surface and see, oh, wow, they really are genuine, still kind of go with them. Just because they don't have that big shiny certification doesn't mean they're not sustainable. And a lot of brands that can get those shiny certifications, they pay for them. And not as though they don't necessarily, they check all the boxes, but you have to pay for those. And that's similar with the apps, so which has become very popular. Kind of those beauty apps, like the Environmental Working Group has one, or another one called Think Dirty, where you can scan the QR codes and be like, oh, is this safe or is this not safe? It's great that they've kind of moved in that direction to help educate consumers easier who aren't going to Google every single ingredient when they're standing in a store aisle. But another thing to consider is, well, you have to pay to be on those apps. So like, I would love to be on those apps, but me as a small brand, I can't afford that. So it's just, as a consumer, really kind of looking at what brand you're buying it from. And packaging, packaging is another thing that gets a lot of rap in terms of sustainability. What they can look out for is a good kind of rule of thumb. There is a huge debate between plastic and glass, and that's super complicated and many nuances within between, which we're not going to get in here. But just like a rule of thumb, if you see like wood caps on them, like wood caps look nice and they evoke sustainability, but that little size wood cap, what can that be made into after you put it in the recycling? Most likely not many things if you think about it. So like, does it get biodegraded or does it get thrown in the trash? And so another issue within packaging is, if you know, making sure that you bring it back to, there's a nonprofit organization called the Pack Collective, and they have bins now across like Credo Beauties and Sephora's, and I think Ulta even, not as though me or these listeners necessarily shop there all the time, but you can bring any empties in of your cosmetics that are, because basically anything that's smaller than the size of a yogurt cup, traditional recycling systems, even the really good advanced ones in parts of California, they can't process it just because they're too small. So all those little small plastic parts or those caps or those bottles end up in the landfill. So it is very crucial to help kind of bring those back to those recycling bins. But another thing on the sustainability element, people think if it's glass, it's sustainable and it's better. Glass is tricky because it requires more resources to make. And if it is a type of glass that can be infinitely recycled and actually gets back to a proper facility that can recycle it, great, that's there. However, you want to avoid glass that is solid white or black or really any color except for clear, blue, brown, or green, because those glasses are really they're the most common, and they're the ones that have the chance to actually be recycled infinitely into new glass because that's what they're making. But some of these other color glasses that look really pretty, and unfortunately a lot of them are now used in cosmetic packaging, those can't be infinitely like recycled again into new glass. The best case scenario, they get to a plant and they can become pavement or tile or like fish on the bottom. So sustainable packaging is a whole issue. But going back on some tips on sustainability for some of your listeners, another element to look out for is when a brand highlights 1 or 3 ingredients as their hero ingredients, saying, this is so sustainable, we farm it this way. Just be mindful about like, what are the other ingredients in there? Because even if there is these hero ingredients that they're calling out, well, what percentage is that? Is that 90% of the formula, or do those only make up less than 3%? What's in the rest of the 97% of that bottle you're buying? Are those sustainable? So it's really just questioning and transparency for it.
Yeah, that's a lot of info. And I mean, it's with every product, right? I mean, not just in the skincare industry. These are the things that we talk about often on the podcast about transparency and what to look out for. But with skincare, I feel like there's just like not that many regulations in the United States yet. I know California has maybe a little bit more than other states, But then we also need to talk about chemicals because chemicals in skincare are very, very prevalent. And you already mentioned microplastics, which have shown to have health effects. All of us contain microplastics, as well as PFAS, those pesky forever chemicals that I love to talk about. Um, so those are growing concerns in skincare products. So what do you think consumers need to know about these and how to avoid them?
It is so, so tricky because we as a whole, as a country and as a nation, like we need to be pushing back on PFAS and these microplastics in our outdoor gear, in our shoes. They're everywhere. And thankfully, more people are, thanks in part to, I think, some of your podcasting that you've been putting out, educating people as a journalist here. People are getting more and more aware of it, but we still need to make policy change for it. And unfortunately, I think skincare is going to be one of the last ones that, even though you're putting it on your body, people still kind of claim, I think it might be a lesser one than ones where some people will be consuming them. However, it's still very important because they end up in our waterways, our systems when we shower or we wash our face off. Or also, there's also the other element of you're essentially just putting plastic on your skin, and your skin does absorb a certain amount of whatever you put on it that goes into your bloodstream, especially microplastics, because they're so small. They can have a higher chance of probability of doing so, especially depending on what type of formula it is and how it's formulated, because there's not to get too in the weeds on formulation standpoint, but there's different ingredients and different ways you can formulate things that can penetrate your skin deeper versus ones that just like stay on the surface, or like a shampoo you just use and you wash off, that sort of thing. um yeah, there's a ton of them in skincare, especially in makeup and even some sunscreens. So and like the most horrific thing is even some of these green beauty brands are now using them as stabilizers. And so why these chemicals, and particularly I'm talking about PFAS and microplastics here, why a lot of these are used is because they help with the texture and feel. They give that nice sensory experience. And so that's why there's been an uptick in these serums that have become so popular, is where that they're using. So that's a tip kind of for later, is like, when you're buying a serum, double check those ingredients, because serums typically have a higher probability of having some of these ingredients in them that are microplastics. They're essentially putting like saran wrap on your face, kind of, in a way. Um, I know it's a terrible visual. But kind of going back to why they use them, it creates this wonderful sensory experience, but they also lock in moisture, which is known as an occlusive. And occlusives ingredients are found naturally in the environment and are in plant oils and certain butters and other ingredients. Like I use some occlusive ingredients, but they have other wonderful beneficial properties, and they contain no microplastics. They're super effective at locking in that moisture in your skin, which helps then you contain that youthful look. And so that's why these are used, because they help lock it in, but they do it very cheaply, because they're on the chemical produce side and they're effective. However, it's not the best option out there, but really it boils down to is they're inexpensive. And they're inexpensive. They give great results. They feel nice. They work. So let's throw them in a skincare bottle that we can charge. Even some of these are in some of higher end skincare products that they charge astronomical prices for, and you're just basically putting it on your skin. It's wild. But yeah, so some of the ones that you kind of want to look out for on there would be pretty much silicones and any petroleum derived ingredients, and as well as almost all polymers are essentially a microplastic. There are some polymers that are not, though. So on the tips for people, it's just so hard because you have to be an ingredient nerd looking at all of these things. But double check your serum that you're buying, as well as avoiding waterproof mascara and long-lasting lipsticks and those sort of things. So similarly, as kind of you've covered, a lot of outdoor gear has prevalently used like these microplastics and PFAS in their waterproofing. Similar elements that they use in mascara for women, especially waterproof mascara. And kind of mentioning back those apps like EWG and Think Dirty can be great to check some of these things. But then again, it's not a sure shot because not all small brands can afford to be on them. I mean, overall, like my rule of thumb, I'm not saying all non-plant ingredients are bad, but if you want to be on the safe side, I would just stick to plant-based ingredients or ingredients that you can understand or recognize, or even just finding products that have a shorter ingredient deck. So they only have like 10 ingredients and not 40. And then you're much more easier to Google those 10 ingredients if you don't know which one's which to find out what they really are. But those would be kind of some more of my tips on how to kind of stay away from those because they are there. And we need more research on the effects of microplastics for our body, their use in skincare, their use across all these industries. And it's just so unfortunate because they're cheap and they're so prevalent across industry and because they help make money for all these companies, there's such a lack of research in them.
That's so true. I mean, there is a lot of research with PFAS and microplastics, but it is hard to find it specific to skincare products and like cosmetics and things like that, which you wouldn't think so, but it's such a big industry that there's always lobbying against that type of science. And we do want to produce a second season of Forever Chemicals about skincare and those types of products, but we're struggling to get funding. So stay tuned and fingers crossed that we can talk about this stuff in more detail.
Yeah, I think that would be fantastic. And there is research on PFAS microplastics. My statement was more in the broad of like, there needs to be more though, because the consequences, like there's so many areas where we just need more of it and we need more policy changes and more data to get lawmakers to actually change things.
Absolutely. And you mentioned one of the easiest ways to kind of avoid those types of synthetic chemicals or plastics, petrol materials, whatever it might be that we don't really want on our skin, is to look for plant-derived ingredients. So, what are the benefits of using plant-derived ingredients, especially locally sourced plants like you try to do in your products?
Yeah, so I mean, the benefits in my mind are, and also kind of historically, if you look at it too, is plants are the power and kind of the foundation of so much of our modern medicine. And they have been used for centuries by Native peoples here in different civilizations across as these wonderful power plants for multiple different purposes. And we've kind of come away from that. So by going back to using natural and native plant oils or kind of serums, or I'm not serums, excuse me, tinctures or different ways we are deriving these active ingredients from these plants in their purest natural form states. We are going back to the origins of what so many modern elements are made off of. And so it's kind of going back to the roots in that rich history. So those are kind of some of the benefits in my mind of just historically of why we should be going back to them. And just a little side note, one of the reasons why, unfortunately, during colonization of the U.S., why Native people's medicines and across the United States has been disregarded was when they came over. Native Americans have an extensive history of various different native plants here that have been used. However, colonizers came over and completely like, nope, we're not recognizing that. We're gonna do modern medicine. A lot of it is based off some of their discoveries that they could then profit on, which then goes back into like pharmaceutical origin industries. But it really is from a colonization standpoint, why a lot of these native plants have been disregarded for so long, which is just atrocious. However, in those early days when they did get sick or when they did need help, they turned to the Indians and they helped them and gave them their medicines and they benefited from it. But we've kind of brushed that away in history. And so that's kind of like the tradition, or not tradition, but the origin of why we aren't recognizing some of these plants, where if you look at other cultures like India, they've held on to their traditional medicines of Ayurveda that have been celebrated for centuries. It's much more prevalent. And so that's why in the US and in North America particularly, we don't have that rich of history and kind of that holding on to and celebrating these wonderful plants that are there. And that's part of the reason why when I went through my research and I discovered these wonderful elements of them, I was like, wait, we need to go back to our origins, what grows here locally and what works and has been disregarded for centuries due to, unfortunately, colonization in this history and then pharmaceutical industries that just spiraled. But going back to the other part of your question of why using locally sourced plants in skincare can be better is if it's growing where it's native and it grows in, let's say, Wyoming or California, if that's where it's native, it doesn't need as many resources to grow because it's growing where it normally is just can flourish. It has the right sun, it has the right temperature, it has the right water. So there's all these other elements you don't have to think through, as well as the fact that native plants contribute to helping our ecosystems thrive because they are part of the entire kind of not supply chain, but flora and fauna that the insects need, that the other plants that they benefit, that the animals that are there. So it's part of this very interconnected system. And when we start taking out some of those elements, like in terms of wild harvesting, there can become a threat to some of these ecosystems, just as when we see, like when we do clear cuts of logging, what that does to certain areas across our nation. But another element for why local plants are beneficial is that if you're helping support local farmers and then the rural communities that grow them. And most local farmers and farmers across North America use regenerative agricultural practices, except for the ones that are doing mass producing of food for different food systems, but that's a whole nother topic. In addition to using local native plants, you're reducing your having a lower carbon footprint, transporting them at the time, because you're not having them ship from all around the world to you to then put into a skincare product. It comes from 2 states over that you can ship by truck versus on an airplane, which is the worst, or a freight container. And so in kind of counteracting with that, these exotic ingredients have become very popular. And because they become popular, they are now, a lot of them internationally, being prone to being endangered. And with their popularity, then you get questionable labor conditions of how they're being, as well as then the element of just transporting them around the world. And some of them, as they become popular, they require a lot of resources to grow. So like prickly pear seed oil is super popular, and that's primarily grown in Morocco. But they're like these itty bitty tiny seeds. And when you think about the amount of resources that need to go into prickly pear and then foraging those seeds and then pressing for the oil, it's a ton of resource. And that's why the oil is very expensive. But it's like when you can find similar properties and nutrients in a prickly pear seed oil in other ingredients that don't require that many resources, just go to the other ingredient.
Yeah, and you mentioned some concerns, obviously, with harvesting these types of local or native plants. And would you be able to go into more detail about that? I know you talked about like overuse of things, labor practices, et cetera. But if we're looking at like native species specifically, what are some of the risks to like the ecosystem? And is there a rise in using these types of products in skincare?
Great question. Wild crafting is kind of what the term is, and that is trending and is becoming very popular for a few reasons. And for some of your listeners who aren't aware of what wild crafting is, wild crafting essentially is foraging or picking plants that grow in the wild from like a national forest or from the side of the road, pretty much where they grow anywhere. And the common argument of why they're better, which is why we're seeing an uptick in them used in the health industry as different tinctures or in the beauty, is that they can fully develop their nutrients. However, if they're commercially grown or grown by, let's say, a small farmer, they're going to fully develop their nutrients for them too, using the regenerative practices, making sure they have all the nutrients they have that are on their farm, rather than being grown in the wild. So this whole argument that it's a better quality is really BS. And instead, they can become more prone to being endangered or harming the surrounding ecosystem around them if they are being over-harvested, because there's no regulations on them. They're growing in the wild. And so if you as a forager or a company are going out there and picking X ingredient for your, let's say, your cream, well, who's ensuring that you're not taking too much, and that you're not going back to the same spot every year, or you're not going and picking your quota and then someone behind you comes a few days later and picks their quota and then it's wiped out for that plant. And when you over harvest, then it damages the reproduction for future years. So there's no regulations on wild harvesting, even though it has become very popular. And so it's like, it's the biggest question of like, we have so much regulation in the logging industry, and logging is heavily regulated because you just can't have commercial companies going out there and clear cutting forests. Rightfully so, it's regulated, but we don't seem to care when it's smaller plants. So you can come in as companies and take these small plants or whatever it may be you're foraging, and there is no regulation on it, which is just bonkers to me, because it can create more harm. And so we have these regulations with like water companies that come in and try to just take the water and bottle and put it in bottled water, or like when you get a fishing license or a hunting license. But for these plants, we don't have it. And so why should we let these health and beauty companies just be taking these plants for profit? And like, they don't own them. And we're not sure what like if they didn't over harvest. There's just so many questions in it. And it's like, it's super complicated when it becomes commercial. And I'm not anti wild harvesting or foraging. I think if you're doing it for your personal use and at home, yeah, go for it. But if you're doing it with mass amounts and you're a large company, you need quite a bit in order to produce what you're making. So just when it becomes a commercial endeavor, it becomes totally, totally different. And full disclosure, I do use 3 ingredients that are wild crafted. However, the ingredients that I use, I've ensured, because this was a huge ethical kind of decision for me. The ones that I use, they grow so much throughout North America, and 2 of them are huge trees, and that you don't need massive elements of them, and they're all across. So they're not endangered. They grow plentifully. They're not some of these other berries that are like cloudberry is one that's becoming very popular now that's being wild harvested. There's not as much of it to go around. And so that's kind of where I took the thing of, this is a large tree, they grow plentifully, it's not endangered, they're easy to grow. I'll take these through wild crafting because these ingredients are wonderful and these are the best suppliers I can find, versus ones that are a small bush.
Yeah, that's really interesting to learn about wild crafting. Because I mean, when you think of foraging, I usually think of just like an individual that does it for a hobby. Like you want to go out and maybe grab some mushrooms or something like
Yeah,
that.
which is awesome, and people should do that.
Yeah, but then when you, like you're saying, once you commercialize it, that causes a whole slew of other issues. And so I want to talk a little bit about maybe some of the alternatives. I know that you're aware of like lab grown plants and their use in skincare. That was like a new concept to me that I learned about through you. So do you see that becoming a more sustainable alternative to wild crafting? So then we can like utilize these types of plants and their benefits?
Yeah, great question. And it was totally new to me. I had no idea lab grown plants were a thing in skincare until when I was doing all my due diligence, because I didn't want to use any synthetic ingredients in my product. That's when I discovered it. But it's wild that there are lab grown plants. However, from a sustainability standpoint, yes, they are more sustainable than real plants because they're being replicated in a lab. You don't have water, you don't have sunlight, you don't have the time to grow. So from a sustainability standpoint, as we move towards these things, yes, lab grown plants are that. Could it displace the farmers that would grow these plants otherwise? Yes. So that's a whole nother element in terms of local farming economies. But they do have efficacy tests that they put them against. But it is just kind of a strange concept to me in the sense that, as many people are familiar with lab grown beef, it's kind of lab grown beef, which has gotten all sorts of debates in the media. It's the same thing with lab grown plants, essentially, is what you're doing is you're replicating those cells. And yeah, they can work for your skin and they are more sustainable. I just chose the decision not to do that for my product because of all the other values that I have against it. But in the future, who knows where other skincare companies are going to go and take a stance on that. And you can't figure it out on the INCI list in the ingredient deck if it is a lab grown plant or not. It just says the plant. So that's another thing to just kind of consider. It doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing, but it's just interesting that we don't have to disclose that. And the only reason I discovered it was because there's a few ingredients I wanted to try to use And so I contacted the company, finding more info, and I'm like, oh, wait, this is lab grown, but you're marketing like it's not lab grown. So even the distributors that are selling these synthetic plants and these then lab grown plants that are replicated in there, they're not marketing as such. They're marketing them as just, this is the tuberose extract. So it's really quite wild, but it is more sustainable. And then the other question, not to get to like, are microplastics everywhere, but if they're grown in a lab, they're most likely going to be in some form of plastic. So then it's like, well, what type of plastic is it in? And depending on that type of plastic, is it seeping into the final ingredient? When they do testing, it's just on the efficacy and the safety of the microbial growth. It's not on like, oh, how many microplastics are in this? So like, that's just another question to think about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like it kind of all circles back to the transparency piece, right? I mean, if you are a company and you can identify your sourcing clearly and transparently to the customer, that can help them make a more informed decision. And that's what we're all about here. Adventuring plans on your calendar? Remember to grab your Lava Linens travel towel on your way out the door. Founded by a mother-daughter team, Lava Linens crafts durable, luxurious travel towels as a more sustainable and better performing alternative to microfiber and cotton towels. Powered by flax, hemp, and tencel, they're designed to be by your side for years to come. Use the code Outdoor Minimalist for 15% off your next order. I mean, of course, your skincare products, I would love if people checked them out, but there are also ways that you can make some of these at home or use things that maybe grow in your area or you can buy easily at the grocery store. So what are some at-home remedies, products, plants, ingredients that people can use for skincare or hydration, anything in that realm?
Yeah, of course. So the two things that your skin needs to be healthy essentially are hydration and moisture. And those actually mean different things for your skin, even though they are used interchangeably, even within the skincare realm, which is interesting. But so since those are the two elements that you need, to give you guys a few tips of what you can find. So like hydrating elements are things that are humectants that draw water and moisture into your skin. So some of the super common ones are aloe vera. So you could get that from an aloe vera plant you have at your home, or if you do buy aloe vera or aloe vera juice, that's great. Honey is another natural humectant if you're not vegan. You could do like a honey face mask once a week, just put straight honey on there. And there's also other antimicrobial benefits in there. Glycerin is vegetable glycerin is another common one that you can just add a few drops to some water or a hydrosol and then put that on your face. Glycerin helps bring that hydration, the moisture in. I mean, hydration in. And then a pure hyaluronic acid is another great humectant. And that's why hyaluronic acid has got so much popularity. However, you do have to do some due diligence because a lot of hyaluronic acids are of synthetic form or are mixed with a bunch of other things. But I would say stick with the first three kind of I just mentioned for at home. And then moisture, to get that for moisturizers, I mean, plant oils and butters. There are so many wonderful ones out there. And the most common one people have is olive oil. It's not the best one for your skin, but it totally works. So if you're in a pinch, put some olive oil in there. Or avocado oil is super good. It has one of the fatty acids chains is palmitic acid, which is great. And that's awesome for mature skin, also sun exposed skin, also with some sunspots. Hazelnut seed oil is another great one. Jojoba is super common. And with whatever oil you get, do go for cold pressed because the cold pressed oils retain a lot of their nutrients like phytosterols and other elements that can help feed your skin more versus the refined oils. Refined oils essentially remove all of that and they last longer on the shelf. But they're not as good for your skin. So those are kind of some at-home things you can find. But if you are interested in learning more about why moisture and hydration are key for your skin, and because I think more people, if you aren't going to be buying skincare, just go get some of these things. I did create I have a free download on this where you can find out more about the moisture and hydration. And I give 6 items that you can typically have in your home or you can find in any grocery store and do it on the cheap to help take care of your skin because I wasn't a skincare person before this endeavor, and I wanted to help more people who just want to get outdoors but want healthy skin, take care of their skin without having to buy a ton of products or walk into like an actual beauty store and be overwhelmed and then potentially get a bunch of chemicals as well. So yeah, you can check that out at nationbotanics.com/blog, simplify skincare / budget-friendly skincare secrets. But I bet you might also put it in the show notes for ease.
Yeah, absolutely. I will include that in the show notes as well as any of the other resources that you mentioned here today. But with that, how can listeners learn more about your work and products beyond that free download?
Yeah, you can go to nationbotanics.com. And if you use the code minimalist, you can also get 15% off.
Ooh, slay. Yes, I'll include that in the notes as well. I did know that before we recorded, but I forgot while you were talking.
All good. We can always record it if you want.
That's okay. We love an authentic reaction. Thanks for listening. And if you like what you hear, let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book, on YouTube, or subscribe to our weekly newsletter at theoutdoorminimalist.com. For even more updates, other educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with the shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.